Welcome back to part 3 of the Black Friesian horse. The next part on this horse that we're going to do is the neck. I'm using the Terry Ludwig eggplant right underneath the jaw of the horse to add the shadow cast by the horse's head onto the neck. I'm using the black new pastel stick to get around the edge of the leather halter and bridles so that I don't get eggplant color on that. So now I'm using the eggplant again to go up and emphasize the creases on the horse's neck. I'm adding in some Giraud Blue Violet around the eggplant, and I'm also adding in the Unison Blue Violet, which, as I've mentioned before, is a little bit grayer in color than the Giraud Blue Violet. I'm continuing to add the Unison Blue Violet for a large part of the neck, working closer up towards the mane. Now I'm using the eggplant to add darker color as we move up the neck. Using a small blender, I'm going to blend all of these areas of color together. A small blender helps me to get up close to the head without spreading the dark colors that I just added onto that. So I'm going to use a small blender and blend very carefully but thoroughly to blend the dark and light colors together. I've added a bit more eggplant into the center of the horse's neck to give the appearance of roundness, and I'm going to blend that in. I'm blending this with as you can see, I'm blending this with a makeup sponge instead of a small blender. So I'm using a larger blender to combine all these colors together. And I'm using my fingers because I have a lot of pastel on paper now. So it moves around a little better for me when I use my fingers. I'm using the black new pastel to add the creases on the neck. So I'm using the edge of the black new pastel. And then I'm going to highlight those with a general white pencil. I'm adding the background around the horse's head on the left-hand side with the Richardson colors that we used before. You are not locked into using the colors that I used. You can use them in any order you would like. I like the pink and the yellow combination together here because it's also on the opposite side of the horse's face. And then I use the darker yellow up next to pink and then blending it with the lighter yellow and adding a little more pink to that and violet as I move outward. I want it to be very colorful. I'm using a small blender to get in the smaller area next to the ear to blend the color. And I'm using the eggplant to add some dark color. And I'm going to blend that with a blender. Kind of refining the edges. And this is the black Cretacolor to get a little finer edge on that. And then I'm adding black with the new pastel on both ears. And using the white general pencil to add some more highlights to the forelock. Now you can see where I added pink just below where I'm using the pencil there to define where the horse's eye is in the side of his face. We're going to start working on this ornament that's on top of the horse's head. I'm using the Carbothello 770 Payne's Gray pencil to draw in the darker areas of the ornament. And darken it a little bit with the black Create-A-Color pencil. So I'm just going to outline using my image as a reference. I'm outlining the stones in the ornament on his head with the white general pencil. Having to redraw it a little bit because it got lost in the when I put in the background. But I'm filling in the center with the white, and I'm drawing in the one on the outside that's got kind of lost in the background color. I'm also using the tip of the white pencil to draw in the brighter stones that are set on either side of the larger ones. I'm outlining the center stones with the gray 726. Carbothello pencil. And I'm going to go around that to make it a little darker with the black Create-A-Color pastel stick. And on the outside, I'm outlining the stones and the smaller stones with the black. I'm just following the photo reference. This is the 770 Payne's Gray with a little yellow and a little dark in there. I'm not really sure what this is exactly, so when I don't know what something is, I just use the photo reference and follow the values. Now this is gray, Carbothello Gray 720. I'm filling in these larger areas, and then I'm kind of straightening them up with the Payne's Gray Carbothello, and just lightly going over the 720 to kind of darken it down some. use the Create a Color black pastel lead to fill in that top area of the ornament. And blend it with your small blender. I'm adding a few white hairs again with the general pastel pencil. If you see something, fix it, because if you wait, you might forget. Now the stones on the headdress, I'm coloring in, about every other one with the 720 Carbothello pastel pencil. They look kind of opally colored to me, so now I'm coloring in every other one with the Pitt 102 pastel pencil, which is a pale, they call it a cream. It's a pale yellow color. And I'm going to use white, the general white, to outline the gray ones, and add a little white to that, to each of the stones actually, to kind of create a reflection. I'm going to use the 726 Carbothello pencil to outline the stones and kind of go around them. I didn't want to use black, so I'm using the dark gray. And then that little piece of bright white pastel that I used earlier in this project, I'm using to make the smaller stones brighter and add some brighter white to the gemstones in the headdress. Now you can use new pastel white if you have that. I like this soft pastel. I'm using the black Carbothello pencil to go around the stones. It makes them easier to be seen. And now I'm using my black new pastel to put in the feathers. Now I'm using the edge of it. You could also use the Create a Color black pastel lead, or you could use your pastel pencil. Any of those would work to add the feather. I'm using my black pencil for finer lines on the feather. Now I'm using the Derwent 240 Violet Oxide to add some accents to the feather. Using the Terry Ludwig eggplant, I'm placing a dark line at the base of the braid where it meets the neck, which also that's where the shadow is from the braid onto the neck. So I'm using the Terry Ludwig for that. And then I'm going to blend that in to the horse's neck. Using the edge of the Terry Ludwig, I am adding the shadow to the top of the braid. Very carefully. Using a small blender, I blended in the Terry Ludwig, and now I'm using a black pastel pencil to draw in the black lines that represent the hair of the braid. So I'm outlining each section of the braided hair and drawing in a few black lines. Using the Unison blue violet, I am adding the base color of each braid. So I'm using the edge of that. After adding all of the blue violet, I'm going to use my tiny blender to blend the eggplant into the blue violet very carefully on each braid. after blending in the colors, I'm using the Creative Color Black Pastel Lead to go around the outside edge of the braid to further define the braid and smooth out any ragged edges that might be there from the blending. I'm making the darks on the braid, the shadow areas, a little darker with the new pastel stick. I didn't think they were quite dark enough, so I'm going to take my new pastel and make them a bit darker and even them out a little bit more before adding the highlights. I'm adding highlights to the braid with the white, general white pastel pencil by making short strokes into the blue, and that represents the highlight. Looks really nice, adds definition to the braid. I'm using a little bit of 430 Carbothello Ultra Blue Middle on the braid as well. But I didn't use as much of that as I've been using the white, general white charcoal pencil. I also used my black 750 Carbothello pencil to pull out a few hairs from the braid into the background. I'm using my black new pastel to sharpen the shadow of the braid onto the horse's neck. I'm using a little bit of white up at the top here for highlight. Join me for part 4 of this series of the Black Friesian horse as we finish up the rest of the details on the horse.